He conquered nations, he controlled Europe, but in the end, his biggest enemy was himself. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story so massive it literally feels like a Hollywood blockbuster. We're talking about the tragic rise and fall of Napoleon Bonaparte. Forget the boring dates and stuffy politics. We are zooming in on the raw, human story of a guy who went from nothing to absolute master of the world, only to lose it all.
Let's just put this into perspective. At the absolute peak of his power, he was a literal force of nature. I mean, he conquered nations so fast it left his enemies completely paralyzed. He controlled Europe on a scale nobody had seen since the Roman Empire. He was a battlefield savant, an unstoppable administrator, and a man who believed, with zero doubt, in his own massive destiny.
But here's the ultimate fascinating irony we're going to unpack today. How does a guy with that level of unparalleled genius, someone who literally outsmarted the combined empires of Europe over and over again, how does he engineer his own downfall? Basically, how did his biggest enemy become his own overconfidence? Keep that in the back of your mind as we go, because the answer is absolutely wild.
Section 1. The Outsider.
Okay, the contrast here is just unbelievable. He was not born into French royalty. No way. He was born on the island of Corsica, which France had just taken over. So when he's sent off to a military academy in mainland France at age 9, he's this poor, minor noble with a super thick accent, and man, he was ruthlessly bullied by the wealthy aristocratic kids. They made fun of his height, his weird mannerisms, even his terrible French spelling. He felt like a total outsider. But you know, instead of breaking him, this isolation built a massive fire in him. He became super reserved, buried himself in history and math books, and developed this crazy, burning ambition to prove everyone wrong.
Which brings us to Section 2, the swift ascent.
So, the French Revolution happens, throwing the whole country into absolute chaos, completely tearing down the old rich aristocratic order. But for a highly capable young artillery officer, that chaos was a ladder. First up, the Siege of Toulon. He uses these brilliant, totally unconventional artillery tactics, and boom, he gets promoted to brigadier general at just 24 years old. Then, a royalist rebellion threatens to overthrow the government in Paris. They bring him in to defend it, and without blinking, he orders his cannons to fire a ruthless whiff of grape shot right into the rebel crowds. Deadly? Yes, but it saved the government. After a streak of mind-blowing victories abroad, he comes back to a messy Paris and straight-up orchestrates a coup. Just like that, in a few short years, the bullied kid from Corsica is the absolute ruler of France.
Section 3. Master of Europe.
He didn't just want to lead a republic, you guys. He wanted a dynasty. He literally crowned himself Emperor of the French. And the crazy part? He backed up that massive ego with absolute battlefield genius. His true masterpiece was the Battle of Austerlitz. Facing down this huge combined army of Russians and Austrians, Napoleon does the unthinkable. He purposely weakens his right flank. He actually fakes a retreat. The enemy totally takes the bait, rushing down from the high ground to crush him, and they walk right into a trap. Napoleon's hidden troops surge up and absolutely shatter their center. A tactical marvel. But remember, he wasn't just conquering, he was reforming. He drops the Napoleonic Code, which established equality before the law, killed off feudalism, and entirely rewrote the legal framework of Europe. A legacy that, believe it or not, still heavily shapes world law today.
Through conquest, smart alliances, and literally just placing his own brothers on foreign thrones, Napoleon eventually ruled over roughly 40% of the entire European population. Just take a second to imagine that. That level of power concentrated in one single man. He's redrawing the borders of Germany, Italy, Poland like it's nothing. He seemed completely invincible, and his armies were terrifyingly effective. But here's the catch. When you control that much of the world, when you win that many impossible battles, a really dangerous psychological shift happens. You start to believe your own hype. You start to think you can never, ever lose.
And that leads right into Section 4, the fatal mistake.
So he's frustrated that Russia isn't playing ball with his trade blockades, right? He decides to just force them into submission. He puts together what was, at the time, one of the largest invasion forces in human history. We are talking a staggering 450,000 frontline troops. He arrogantly thinks this is going to be a walk in the park, a swift, decisive victory. He just wants to lure the Russians into one massive battle, crush them, and make the Tsar surrender in a few weeks. Easy, right?
Well, no, the Russians totally refused to play his game. Instead of fighting that massive army head-on, they just retreated. And as they fell back, they burned everything. Their own land, their own crops, their own villages. A brutal, scorched earth strategy. When Napoleon finally rolls into Moscow, it's a ghost town. And the very next night, The city is deliberately set on fire. With no surrender coming from the Tsar and literally zero food for his men or his horses, Napoleon has to do the unthinkable. He has to turn back. And guys, that is when the true nightmare begins. The infamous Russian winter hits. Temperatures plummet to an insane -40 degrees Celsius. His men are constantly harassed by Cossacks, they're starving, they're freezing to death in the snow, and disease is just running rampant.
He marched in with 450,000 troops. By the time the broken pieces of his army finally dragged themselves out of Russian territory, only about 75,000 had survived. It was an absolute catastrophe, and it was a completely self-inflicted wound. In that freezing snow, his aura of invincibility was totally shattered. The rest of Europe suddenly realizes, hey, the giant can bleed, and they immediately team up to strike him while he's down.
Which brings us to our final act, Section 5, the final stand.
Forced to abdicate, he gets exiled to this tiny Mediterranean island called Elba. Now, you think the story ends there, right? Nope. This is Napoleon we're talking about. 10 months later, he literally slips past British guard ships and escapes back to France with just 1,000 men. The new French king panics and sends the 5th Regiment to intercept him. They meet on this narrow mountain road. Napoleon walks right up to the opposing army, completely alone. He opens his coat, bares his chest, and shouts, "Here I am, kill your emperor, if you wish." There is this agonizing silence, and then a massive cheer erupts. Long live the emperor! The soldiers defect on the spot. It is pure, unadulterated cinematic drama. He marches all the way back to Paris and takes his throne back without firing a single bullet.
But this epic comeback, what we call the 100 Days, it was doomed from the start. The major powers of Europe immediately declared war, not on France, mind you, but on Napoleon personally. And it all culminates at the legendary Battle of Waterloo, facing off against his massive combined force of British, Dutch, and German troops under the Duke of Wellington. And with the Prussian army showing up late in the day to just crush his flank, Napoleon's army is finally, definitively broken. His ultimate gamble had failed. There was absolutely no escaping this time. He was exiled to St. Helena. It's this remote, damp, rat-infested rock way out in the middle of the South Atlantic, heavily guarded by British warships. He spends his last years dictating his memoirs, trying to lock in his legacy, while slowly dying of what was probably stomach cancer. In delirium, his dying words were basically a summary of his entire existence. France, the army, head of the army, Josephine. It's the ultimate tragic ending, really. Going from a bullied outsider to the absolute master of the world, only to be brought down by his own unstoppable ambition and dying completely alone. So what does this incredible, devastating story teach us about the blinding nature of power? Where exactly is that line between true genius and fatal hubris? Well, that is a question worth pondering long after this story ends. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.